Bradford Hastings laughed. Not the polite, suppressed kind of laugh that people use when they're trying to hide contempt. The real kind, head thrown back, shoulders shaking, loud enough to bounce off the high ceiling of the Cook County courtroom and land exactly where he intended it to land, on his wife. "She came alone," he said to Dexter Foyle, his attorney, his voice carrying the easy pleasure of a man who has already arranged the ending of a story before the first page has been read. He didn't lower it. He never lowered his voice. "She's going to represent herself, Dex. 17 years married to me, and she thinks she can walk in here with a folder and win." Dexter Foyle had practiced family and civil law in Chicago for 26 years. He had seen a great many things, across a great many courtrooms. He did not laugh. He watched Adrienne Hastings cross the floor and noted, with a professional attentiveness he could not quite explain, the particular way she moved. She was dressed simply, a navy blazer, gray slacks, a single strand of pearls she'd had since before the marriage. She carried a slim briefcase and a legal pad, and nothing else. She looked, to anyone who cared to observe her, exactly like a woman who did not belong in a courtroom. Dexter had learned over 26 years that the people who looked like they did not belong were sometimes the most dangerous people in the room. He said nothing. "Before we go any further, if you're watching this, do see something for me. Subscribe to this channel and stay with this story all the way to the end, because what happens in this courtroom is going to stay with you long after it's over. And drop a comment below telling me what city you're watching from right now. I want to see how far this story reaches. Now let's go." Bradford Hastings had not started with much. In 2007, he was 34 years old, running a small, commercial real estate outfit out of a rented office in Wicker Park with 2 junior associates, an outdated software license, and a business model that his accountant had described gently as ambitious to a fault. He had charm in abundance and capital in deficit. He had a gift for making a handshake feel like a promise and a habit of spending money he hadn't yet earned on things he needed people to think he already had. Then he met Adrienne. She'd been 31. She'd built her career as a financial consultant, the kind companies hired when their numbers stopped adding up in ways that made sense. She was precise and methodical and quiet in the specific way that very intelligent people are quiet, not because they have nothing to say, but because they've learned to be selective about when to say it. She had grown up modest, put herself through the University of Illinois on academic scholarships, and spent her late 20s learning the architecture of other people's money well enough to see where the walls were weak. Bradford proposed 14 months after they met. He held her face in both hands and told her that she saw things in him nobody else had ever bothered to see. He told her that everything he built was going to belong to both of them. She believed him. That's the honest truth of it. And she never pretended otherwise, not even years later, when believing him had cost her almost everything. She loved him, and she believed him, and she folded her professional life into his, the way a person does when they genuinely think they are building something that belongs to both of them equally. She reviewed his contracts late into the night and found the language that would have buried him with 3 different development partners. She restructured the firm's internal accounting in a way that finally made it legible to investors. When his financing for the Wicker Park project collapsed with 8 weeks to closing, she liquidated her own retirement account, $41,000 that had taken 6 years to accumulate, and handed it to him without being asked. He had pressed her hands between both of his and said, "I will never forget this, Addie. Never." The Wicker Park project was the first of 11. Over the next decade, Hastings Development became something real. A company that appeared in business journals, a name on permit filings and ribbon-cutting photographs. Bradford's name. And somewhere in the years that followed, Adrienne Hastings became a phrase, a role. The thing that attended fundraisers and remembered the names of Brad's clients' wives and managed the household and smiled in the right direction at the right moments. She heard herself described at a Gold Coast charity dinner by a woman standing 3 feet away who didn't know she was there. Bradford's wife? She doesn't really do anything. I think she used to be in finance or something, but that was before. Before, as though her whole life had been a prelude. Bradford said it differently but meant the same thing. He said it fondly, the way men sometimes do with things they own. Addie keeps everything running. Without her, I'd be a disaster. He said it at every function. Every room full of people who understood it to mean the opposite of what the words said. She keeps the house. She keeps my calendar. She is decorative and useful in mine. Adrienne listened. She nodded. She went home and, in the quiet of a study, Bradford never entered, she began to plan. It started small. She had always kept sharp. The same accounting journals she'd read in her 20s, a habit of maintaining her credentials on the off chance she ever returned to real work. But the decision to rebuild, actually rebuild, crystallized on a Tuesday evening when Bradford came home from a deal dinner and told her, with what seemed like genuine warmth, that one of his investors had asked if Adrienne the accountant was still in the game. Bradford had laughed. I told him that train left the station a long time ago. She didn't say anything. She smiled and poured him a drink and waited until he was asleep. Then she opened her laptop. She studied at night, online courses first, then weekend programs at DePaul she attended on the days. Bradford was in meetings or traveling. She told no one. She had a private P.O. box. She paid for everything from a checking account Bradford didn't know existed. $12 a month, funded by birthday money, and a household surplus she quietly redirected over the years. It was not a large account. It was a carefully maintained one. In the 5th year, she passed the CPA examination. In the 7th year, she completed the Certified Fraud Examiner credential. She held the certification letter for a long time. She read it twice, folded it along its original crease, and placed it in the same lockbox where she had been storing, for 3 years by that point, copies of everything unusual she had ever found in Bradford's files. Because Adrienne had not spent those 7 years only studying. It had begun with a real estate transfer document she found while reorganizing Bradford's home office, a document showing a parcel he controlled, transferred into an entity she had never heard of. She copied it. She said nothing. She started looking. What she found over the following 3 years was a map. Shell companies, holding entities with names selected for plausibility and obscurity. Meridian Ridge Holdings, Lake Point Asset Group, Blue Fork Properties LLC. Accounts that received transfers from the marital business, but whose beneficial ownership had been carefully layered beneath corporate structures designed to mean nothing to anyone who wasn't looking specifically for them. And the pattern had begun, she eventually calculated, approximately 28 months before Bradford filed for divorce. He had been planning to leave her, and to leave her with nothing, for over 2 years before she'd known anything was wrong. She sat with that knowledge for a long time. She felt in the first days after she understood it fully, a grief so large, it had no edges. She had given the man her retirement savings, her career, her 40s. And in return, he had spent 2 years building a financial architecture designed to ensure that when the marriage ended, she would walk away with less than nothing. She did not grieve for long. Grief was loud, and loud told you where to look. She went cold instead. Court convened at 9:15 on a gray October morning. Judge Sandra Whitten had presided over Cook County civil proceedings for 14 years. She entered without ceremony, took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and looked at the 2 tables before her. On the right, Bradford and Dexter and 2 junior associates. On the left, 1 woman, 1 briefcase, 1 legal pad. Mrs. Hastings, the judge said, the record reflects that you've dismissed your prior counsel and intend to represent yourself. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. You understand what you're stepping into. Mr. Foyle has 3 attorneys at that table with him. Completely, Your Honor. Bradford couldn't stop himself. Something that was almost a sound escaped him. Dexter's hand pressed once firmly on his forearm. Dexter's opening was careful and persuasive. A business environment battered by rising interest rates and stalled development timelines. A man of genuine achievement who had nonetheless seen his portfolio shrink significantly. Bradford's disclosed net worth was a fraction of what the public assumed. What Adrienne was seeking would require the liquidation of a business currently operating at a loss and employing 43 people. We're here to honor the terms of a prenuptial agreement freely entered into by both parties, and to tell the truth about what actually exists. Adrienne's opening was 9 sentences. She thanked the judge. She said she wasn't as experienced as Mr. Foyle and that everyone could probably see that. She said she only wanted the court to look at what was true. That was all she was asking. Bradford whispered to Dexter, "That's it?" Dexter watched Adrienne's hands. They were perfectly still. The morning belonged to Bradford's witnesses. His financial expert, a composed man named Forrest Elliman, walked the court through a narrative of losses. 3 projects, over budget, 2 stalled in permitting, a loan facility restructured twice. Bradford's actual net worth, Forrest testified, was far more modest than public perception suggested. The name carries more weight than the balance sheet. Mr. Hastings is, on paper, considerably less wealthy than people assume. Adrienne's cross-examination lasted 4 minutes. She asked Forrest how long he'd been retained by Bradford's company. 8 years, he said. So he would be familiar with Mr. Hastings' financial holdings in that period. All of them. All of the accounts I was retained to analyze, Forrest said. Adrienne repeated the phrase softly, as though testing its weight. The accounts you were retained to analyze. That's an interesting qualification. She thanked him and sat down. Bradford nearly laughed. She'd had his expert on the stand and let him go in under 5 minutes. In the hallway at noon recess, he held court among 3 friends who had come to watch. Men who attended his box at Soldier Field and had been briefed that very morning that this would be over by noon. "Did you hear her opening?" he was saying. "I only want the court to look at what's true. I mean, come on. 17 years I was married to that woman. I know exactly how she thinks. She's methodical, I'll give her that. But methodical only gets you so far when you don't actually have any." Down the hall, Adrienne stood at the window with a paper cup of water. A young paralegal, named Page, assigned to observe the proceedings for a large downtown firm, found her there and asked hesitantly whether she could ask something. "Of course," Adrienne said. "Why didn't you push harder on Forrest? You had him." That phrase, the accounts he was retained to analyze, he basically handed you something and you let it go. Adrienne looked out at the gray lake through the building's high windows. "I got exactly what I needed." A nervous man guards the door to the room that frightens him. The door is the tell. She took a sip of water. He told this court exactly what he knew, and he was very careful about his words. A man with nothing to hide doesn't need to be careful about his words. He just answers the question. Page stared at her. "You planned that?" "I've had a long time to plan," Adrienne said, "much longer than anyone in that room understands." Bradford took the stand in the afternoon. Dexter walked him through a clean, practiced set of denials. No undisclosed accounts, no hidden assets. A transparent financial disclosure, as painful and complete as it had been to compile. He met the judge's eyes steadily throughout. "Nothing further," Dexter said. Adrienne rose. She walked toward the witness stand, and Bradford, watching her come, felt the last of his tension release. He knew this woman. He had shared a life with her for 17 years. He had watched her fold under pressure, the contractor dispute she'd mishandled in 2014, the partnership meeting she'd backed away from in 2016. He knew how she moved when she was uncertain. She was not moving that way now. He filed that fact away and decided it didn't mean anything. "Hello, Bradford." "Adrienne," he gave the gallery a small, patient look. "You testified that all of your assets have been fully disclosed in these proceedings." "That's correct. No undisclosed accounts, no holdings, no investments, nothing that isn't already before this court." "Nothing." She made a small mark on her legal pad. There was a pause, the kind that, in a film, would be filled with music, but in a courtroom is filled only with the sound of people trying not to breathe. Then she set her pen down. She closed the legal pad. When she looked up, something had shifted in her face. Something had come off. Whatever layer had been there all morning, the careful apology, the visible effort, was gone, and the woman looking at Bradford was not the woman any of them had arrived expecting to see. "Your Honor," she said, and her voice was different now, level, certain, completely without hesitation. "I'd like to introduce Plaintiff's Exhibit A." Dexter was on his feet before she'd finished the sentence. "Objection. We've received no prior notice of." "You received notice in the supplemental filing submitted to the clerk at 8:52 this morning, Mr. Foyle. Time-stamped. I have the confirmation slip." She didn't look at him. "I'll wait while your team verifies it." One of Dexter's associates was already at a tablet. The expression that crossed his face told Dexter everything. Dexter sat down slowly. "Objection overruled," Judge Whitten said. For the first time all morning, there was something new in her voice. "Proceed, Mrs. Hastings." Adrienne opened her briefcase and removed a folder. She held it for a moment. She looked at Bradford. "I'm going to ask you one more time," she said quietly, "and I want you to think carefully, because you are under oath, and because I already know the answer. Do you have any undisclosed accounts?" "No," Bradford said. The word came out half a second too late. "Are you familiar with an entity called Lake Point Asset Group?" Bradford's face went still, not blank, still. The specific stillness of a man hearing the name of something he has spent a great deal of effort to make unfindable. "I have many business relationships. I'd have to check." "Let me help you check." Adrienne opened the folder. "Your Honor, Exhibit A is a certified set of financial records obtained through lawful disclosure and verified by the issuing institution. They document a private investment account controlled solely by the respondent. Its current balance is $26,400,000. The room did not gasp, it inhaled, a single sharp pull of air from 40 people at once. Bradford's face cracked. No, that's not. Where did you?" He stopped. He looked at Dexter. He looked at the judge. He looked at his wife. "There's been a mistake. That account?" "The account was opened 31 months ago," Adrienne said, "in the name of Lake Point Asset Group, whose sole beneficial owner, per the certified corporate registration documents forming the second half of Exhibit A, is you. Your signature is on the account application. Your signature is on 14 separate transfer authorizations, the first of which was executed approximately 27 months before you informed me that you wanted a divorce." She let that land. "Would you like me to read the dates on those transfers?" "Because I find the dates very interesting." Dexter objected. The judge asked on what grounds. Dexter opened his mouth and sat back down. 27 months, Adrienne continued. Nearly 2.5 years of transfers out of accounts. We both held interest into an account only you could touch. You told this court, under oath less than an hour ago, that no such account existed. A pause. You forgot $26 million. It was not a question, and she did not say it cruelly. She said it the way you read a diagnosis aloud. But she wasn't finished, because she had known from the beginning that the money alone would not be enough. A man like Bradford could construct explanations. He could blame advisors, claim passive management, fog the record with complexity. She had spent 3 years anticipating every exit and sealing each one before she ever walked through these doors. Your Honor, she said, I'd like to introduce Exhibit B. Dexter didn't even rise. Exhibit B is a recording. Its authenticity has been verified, and its chain of custody documented in the accompanying affidavit. It is a recording of the respondent, in his own words, discussing a plan to transfer marital assets into offshore structures prior to finalizing this divorce. She paused just slightly. It was made at a dinner in our home. At a table where the respondent felt no need to be careful, because he had spent 17 years assuming that the person in the next room wasn't paying attention. Bradford's head came up slowly. You recorded me, he said, and his voice had gone somewhere low and disbelieving. In our house, Adrienne, you cannot just. Illinois is a one-party consent state, Mr. Hastings, Judge Whitten said, dry and final. Your wife was a party to the conversation. I'll allow it. A sound moved through the gallery. Adrienne set the recorder on the plaintiff's table, a small silver device on a stack of papers, and did not play it yet. She let it sit there, let it be real, let him look at it. Then she reached into her briefcase and removed a single laminated card, and she walked forward and placed it on the rail of the witness box directly in front of her husband. "Do you know what that is, Bradford?" He looked down, his brow furrowed, then his face went slack. "That is my certified public accountant license, issued by the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation." She placed a second card beside the first. "And that is my certified fraud examiner credential. Both have been current and valid for several years. I've held them longer than you've been planning this divorce." Judge Whitten leaned forward. "Mrs. Hastings, you are a licensed CPA and CFE. "I am, Your Honor. I chose to represent myself today because there is no one on earth who understands the forensic details of Bradford's finance better than I do. I built the original accounting architecture for his company 15 years ago. I know exactly where to look. And I have known for 3 years what I would find when I looked." Bradford stared at the cards on the rail. He stared for a long time. "You let me," he started. "All this time you sat at my table, you let me believe you never said a word." "I never lied to you, Bradford," Adrienne said. "I never once told you I couldn't do this. You decided that. You decided a very long time ago that I was decoration. That I was the woman who kept the calendar and remembered your clients' children's names, and had been, as you put it, at the Morgan Park Gala 2 years ago, out of the real world for so long, she wouldn't know where to start." She picked up her folder. "You said that, in front of 11 people, and I smiled and moved on and let you believe what you needed to believe. Because a woman, no one is watching, can do almost anything she wants." She looked at him steadily. "That was always the problem, Bradford. You only ever looked hard enough to see what you'd already decided was there." Bradford opened his mouth. Nothing came out. She turned back toward the bench, almost as an afterthought. And it was not an afterthought. It had been planned for years. She stopped and looked back over her shoulder. "You told me for 17 years that without you, I'd have nothing." She let the room hold that. "You never thought to ask what happens when the foundation you built turns out to have someone else's signature on it." Bradford had no answer. For the third time that day in a life built entirely on always having an answer, he had nothing at all. The recess lasted 14 minutes. In a conference room down the hall, Dexter closed his briefcase with the deliberate care of a man who has made a decision he cannot unmake. The CFE credential, the forensic trail. That recording. He looked at Bradford steadily. "You told me when you retained me that the disclosure was complete. It was substantially complete. $26 million is not a rounding error." Dexter exhaled slowly. "I can't stand in front of Judge Whitten and argue that your financial picture is accurately represented. When we now know it isn't, I'm sorry, my license is not expendable." When court reconvened, Dexter rose and requested a bench conference regarding his continued representation. Bradford offered an adjournment to find new counsel, paused for one beat too long. Then he said, "If she can do this herself, so can I." In the gallery, Paige turned to the attorney beside her and whispered, "Did he just?" "Yes," the attorney said quietly. Bradford reclaimed the witness stand. Adrienne resumed her cross, without notes. She walked him through each transfer authorization from memory, all 14 of them, spread over 27 months, and he attempted to explain several as routine restructuring. She read him the definition of marital asset under Illinois law. He objected to his own testimony. Judge Whitten overruled him. When his voice finally cracked, a brief, sharp sound of a man who had always controlled rooms discovering he could not control this one, the judge let the silence after it do the work. "Mr. Hastings," Judge Whitten said, "you will compose yourself in my courtroom. Are we clear?" Bradford sat back. His hands for the first time were not still. Then he did the thing that finished him. He looked out at the gallery, at the recording, sitting on the plaintiff's table, at his wife, standing calmly 2 feet away, and he reached for the one person he thought might give him ground to stand on. "I'd like to call a witness," he said, Chester Gould. Adrienne did not move, but something in her attention sharpened to a point because she knew that name. Chester Gould had been Bradford's first major silent investor, the man who had put capital into Wicker Park when no one else would. He'd had a falling out with Bradford 5 years ago that Bradford had never fully explained. If Bradford was calling him now, there was only one reason. He wanted to establish that the company's early financial structure, which Adrienne had helped build, somehow made her complicit in what came after. He was going to try to turn her competence into a liability. Chester arrived 20 minutes later. He was a broad-shouldered man, in his early 60s, silver-haired, wearing a good suit with the slight ease of someone who had stopped needing to prove anything to anyone. He walked into the courtroom and looked at Bradford with an expression that contained no warmth whatsoever. Bradford walked him through the early years. Yes, Adrienne had been involved in the financial structure. Yes, she had reviewed documents. Yes, certain holding entities had existed since those foundational days. So it would be fair to say, Bradford said, leaning toward the microphone with a confidence he no longer quite owned, that Adrienne was a sophisticated participant in the financial architecture of my business. Chester was quiet for a moment. Then he turned and looked directly at Bradford. She was the most sophisticated person in the room, he said, usually including you. She built systems that worked. She caught errors that would have cost you 2 deals in the first 3 years. She did it without credit and without compensation, beyond being your wife. A pause. What she did not do was design anything for concealment. The structures we've been hearing about this morning, those came later. After I was gone. After you pushed me out. Bradford's jaw tightened. I'm asking about Adrienne's role. You asked whether she was sophisticated. Chester's voice didn't rise. She was. That's not an indictment of her. It's an indictment of you, because you had someone that capable in your corner for 17 years, and you spent those years making sure she stayed invisible. The gallery stirred. Mr. Gould, Bradford said, you left the company voluntarily. Chester looked at him for a long moment. You diluted my position from 50% to 11% through a series of transfers. You didn't disclose to me until they were complete. Then you offered me a buyout at 11-cent value and told me that if I didn't sign a non-disclosure agreement, you'd keep me in litigation until I ran out of money to fight it. His voice remained entirely level. That is not voluntary. That is the same maneuver you attempted on your wife. Just faster. The room went absolutely still. Objection, he's not. You called him, Judge Whitten said. You opened this door. Sit down, Mr. Hastings. Chester turned to the bench. I drove here today because Bradford called me this morning and asked me to testify that Adrienne was complicit in his financial decisions. I want the court to know that is not true. Adrienne Hastings is the only person in Bradford's professional life who dealt with him with complete honesty. He repaid her the way he repaid me, by building a wall around what she helped him create and then handing her the bill for it. He looked at Adrienne. I'm sorry it took me 12 years to say any of this out loud. One of the 3 men in the gallery stood up. He put on his coat, he walked out, the other 2 followed. Separately, quietly, without meeting Bradford's eyes as they passed his table. Bradford watched them go. He sat alone, and he understood, perhaps for the first time, that these men had not been loyal to him. They had been loyal to his winning, and his winning was over. Adrienne gave her closing without notes. She stood in the center of the room and spoke about a woman who had been 31 years old and in love, and certain that love and partnership were the same word. She spoke about a retirement account emptied into someone else's dream without being asked. She spoke about 17 years, at 1,000 dinner tables being introduced as the woman who didn't do anything. She spoke about the slow, patient work of becoming herself again while standing inside a life designed to prevent it. She said she was not asking for revenge. Revenge was loud, and she was done with loud. She asked the court to look at 14 transfer authorizations, a certified set of financial records, a voice recording, and a prenuptial agreement whose fraud clause Bradford had triggered the moment he signed the first fraudulent transfer. She asked for nothing more and nothing less than what an honest accounting of 17 years required. She sat down. Bradford tried. He stood up. He managed 3 sentences before the words stopped coming. He looked at the empty gallery behind him, at the table where Dexter used to be, at the woman sitting calmly 12 feet away, and he said the truest thing he had said all day. "I don't have a defense," he said. "The evidence is what it is. I did what she says I did, and I did it because I convinced myself she would never find it." His voice was barely above a murmur now. "I was wrong about that." He sat down. Judge Witten's ruling came 40 minutes later. She noted for the record that she had watched the respondent enter her courtroom that morning and find it amusing that his wife intended to represent herself. She noted that this amusement was precisely the vulnerability his wife had spent years quietly turning into a strategy. She noted that the court was not frequently addressed by self-represented litigants who produced forensic accounting analysis of professional caliber in their own proceedings. The findings: Bradford had knowingly and intentionally concealed marital assets over a sustained period of more than 2 years. The concealment was willful. The prenuptial agreement's fraud clause, Section 8, subsection D, which rendered its protections void upon proof of intentional asset concealment, was triggered in full. Asset distribution would proceed under standard equitable distribution law without reference to the prenuptial agreement's terms. The hidden accounts were frozen effective immediately. A full independent forensic accounting would be conducted at Bradford's expense. On the preliminary disclosed assets alone, pending completion of the accounting of the concealed accounts, Adrienne was awarded equitable distribution totaling $4.3 million, with all further awards to be determined upon forensic review of Lake Point Asset Group and any additional entities discovered in that process. Additionally, Judge Witten said, her voice carrying the particular flatness of a statement that has been decided and will not be argued with, this court is referring its findings, including the recorded statements, the 14 fraudulent transfer authorizations, and the sworn testimony regarding the preparation of misleading financial disclosures, to the Cook County State's Attorney's Office for review of potential criminal charges. I would encourage you strongly, Mr. Hastings, to retain criminal counsel before you leave this building today. The gavel came down. Afterward, in the marble corridor, Bradford found Adrienne at the window where she had stood all morning. He was moving differently now, slower, like a man recalibrating something he had relied on his entire life and discovered was broken. "You knew," he said. "For 3 years." He was quiet for a moment. "You sat at my table for 3 years knowing what you knew." "Yes," her voice was steady, not cold, not warm, simply honest. "Because a woman who announces what she knows gives up the only advantage she has. You taught me that, actually, watching how you ran your negotiations. You never put a number on the table until you were certain it would close." She looked at him. "I was certain." He looked at his hands. "When it went wrong between us, was there a moment? One specific moment where you knew what I was?" She considered that. Outside, Michigan Avenue was beginning to fill with the early evening crowd, people moving through the October cold with their collars up and their hands in their pockets, all of them going somewhere they had chosen. "There wasn't one moment," she said finally. "That's the thing about how you do things, Bradford. One grain at a time, over a long time, so slowly that even you probably didn't notice when it crossed a line." She picked up her briefcase. "I kept looking for the day it changed. I don't think there was one. I think you just gradually decided I wasn't worth being honest with. And that's almost sadder than if you'd planned it." He opened his mouth. She kept moving. "Adrienne." She stopped. "What happens to me now?" She didn't turn around. She thought about the rented office in Wicker Park. She thought about the $41,000. She thought about 17 years of dinner parties and gala tables and being introduced as the extension of someone else. "Now," she said, "you find out what it's like to be the person nobody looks at closely, I did it for 17 years. A pause. It doesn't kill you, but it teaches you the truth about yourself when no one else is watching. I learned I was stronger than anyone believed. She pushed open the door at the end of the corridor. I hope you learned something worth keeping too. She walked out. Paige caught up with her in the lobby, slightly breathless. What are you going to do now? Adrienne looked through the glass at the city, at the gray sky above the buildings, at the lake beyond them, at the streets full of people moving through their ordinary Tuesday. Like it was not the day everything had changed. For the first time in 17 years, she said, I don't know, and I have no idea how long it's been since I could say that. She almost smiled. Do you know what that's worth, Paige? To genuinely not know what comes next, and to know that whatever it is, it's mine? Paige studied her. You could consult, go back to it professionally. After today, any firm in the city would. Maybe, Adrienne's voice shifted slightly. The way it does, when a thought is still forming, but already has a shape. But I keep thinking about the other women, the ones who don't have 7 years, and a certification in a lockbox full of copies. The ones sitting across kitchen tables right now from someone who is erasing them one grain at a time, and who believe, the way I used to believe, that they have no power, that the person who controls the money controls the outcome, that this is simply how the world is arranged. She looked at the door. Someone should be telling them what I know. Someone who's actually been inside it. She stepped out into the October air, and it hit her clean and sharp, the particular cold of a Chicago evening, the kind that strips everything down to what's actually there. She had walked into that building that morning with a briefcase and a legal pad and 17 years of silence, finally finding its voice. She walked out the same way she had decided 7 years ago in a quiet study at 2 a.m, to walk through everything that came after. With her eyes open, her hands steady, and the absolute unshakable certainty of a woman who had stopped asking for permission to know her own worth. The strongest voice in any room has never been the loudest one. It's the one that's been patient long enough to make the room go quiet. She had made the room go quiet. She kept walking.